I never thought I would become internet famous for something as ridiculous as a sidewalk that did not exist. But here we are. It all started on a freezing Tuesday morning in February when I found an official-looking letter taped to my front door in Columbus, Ohio. I had just gotten back from my morning run, sweat still cooling on my skin despite the 19-degree weather, when I noticed the bright yellow envelope flapping in the wind. My name is Aaron Hutchinson, and I had lived in my modest ranch-style house on Elmwood Drive for about 3 years. I bought the place specifically because it was not part of any homeowner association. I had heard enough horror stories from friends about HOAs dictating what color they could paint their shutters or how high their grass could grow. No thank you. When I purchased my home, my real estate agent had explicitly confirmed that this property was not within any HOA boundaries, and I had the property documents to prove it. I pulled the envelope off the door, leaving behind a strip of packing tape that had clearly been slapped on with aggressive intent. Inside was a printed letter on official-looking letterhead that read, Pinewood Estates Homeowner Association. My eyebrows shot up immediately because I definitely did not live in Pinewood Estates. That neighborhood was about 2 blocks west of my street, a cookie-cutter development of identical beige houses that had gone up about 5 years ago. The letter was short and accusatory. It stated that I had violated HOA rules by failing to clear the sidewalk in front of my property within 24 hours of the recent snowfall. The fine was $250, with an additional $50 per day if I did not comply immediately. At the bottom, someone named Brenda Kellerman had signed as the HOA president in aggressive blue ink. I stood there in my driveway, reading the letter twice more to make sure I was not losing my mind. First of all, I was not part of their HOA. Second, and perhaps more importantly, there was no sidewalk in front of my house. My property fronted directly onto the street with just a narrow strip of grass and some trees between my lawn and the road. The entire street was like that. Old neighborhood, built in the 70s, no sidewalks anywhere. I crumpled the letter slightly in my fist, then smoothed it back out. This had to be some kind of mistake. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number printed at the top of the letterhead. After 3 rings, a woman answered with a clipped voice that could cut glass. Pinewood Estates, HOA. This is Brenda. Hi, yes, my name is Aaron Hutchinson. I just received a letter from your HOA about a fine, and I think there has been a mistake. Hutchinson, she repeated, and I could hear papers shuffling. 1247 Elmwood Drive. No mistake. You are in violation of community standards. Right, but I do not live in Pinewood Estates, I said, keeping my voice calm. My house is not part of your HOA. I specifically bought a non-HOA property. Our boundaries were expanded last year, Brenda said with the confidence of someone who had never been wrong in her life. Your street is now included in our jurisdiction. I felt a spike of irritation. That is not how HOAs work. You cannot just unilaterally add properties without owner consent and proper legal procedures. I do not appreciate your tone, Mr. Hutchinson. Her voice had gone even colder. The fine stands. You have 48 hours to pay and clear your sidewalk, or we will take legal action. There is no sidewalk, I said, my patience wearing thin. Walk by my house. Look at it. There is literally no sidewalk. That is not my problem. Your property line includes sidewalk maintenance responsibility. She sounded like she was reading from a script. How can I maintain something that does not exist? Again, not my problem. Good day, Mr. Hutchinson. She hung up. I stood there staring at my phone, wondering if I had just hallucinated that entire conversation. I went back inside, tracking snow onto my entryway floor, and immediately pulled up the property records I had received when I bought the house. Everything was exactly as I remembered. My property was not part of any HOA. The deed had no covenants, conditions, or restrictions attached. I was free and clear. This should have been easy to resolve, I thought. I would just send them copies of my property documents and that would be the end of it. I scanned the relevant pages, wrote a polite email explaining the situation, and sent it off to the email address listed on the HOA letterhead. 2 days later, I received another letter. This one informed me that my fine had increased to $350 for failure to pay the original fine within the required time frame. I was also now being fined an additional $500 for willful disregard of HOA authority and aggressive communication with board members. I called the number again. This time, a different woman answered. Pinewood Estates HOA, this is Susan speaking. Hi, I need to speak with Brenda Kellerman about these fines I have been receiving. Brenda is not available right now. What is this regarding? I explained the entire situation again, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. Susan listened with the kind of silence that made me think she was not actually listening at all. Well, if you received a fine, then you must be in violation, she finally said. But I am not part of your HOA. I sent documentation. I do not see any email here, Susan said. You will need to take this up with Brenda directly. She handles all dispute resolutions. Can I schedule a meeting with her? She does not take in-person meetings. All communication must be in writing. I already communicated in writing. I sent an email with my property documents. I am not showing any email, Susan repeated. This was going nowhere. I thanked her for nothing and hung up. Over the next week. The situation escalated in ways I could not have predicted. I received 3 more letters, each with increasingly absurd fines. I was now apparently being charged for continued non-compliance, failure to attend mandatory HOA meeting, which I had never been notified about, and my personal favorite, aesthetic violations for having a red mailbox that did not meet community standards. My mailbox had been red since before their HOA even existed. The total fines now added up to $2,300. I decided it was time to take this seriously. I scheduled a consultation with a real estate attorney named Margaret Chen, who had excellent reviews online. Her office was downtown, in one of those old converted warehouses that tried very hard to look modern with exposed brick and industrial lighting. Margaret was in her 40s, sharply dressed, and had the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had seen every possible variety of human stupidity. I explained my situation while she took notes on a legal pad. You have your property deed and the original purchase documents, she asked. Yes, all of it. There is no HOA covenant on my property. I made sure of that when I bought the place. And they are claiming they expanded their boundaries to include your street. That is what Brenda said on the phone. Margaret frowned. They cannot do that without following very specific legal procedures, which include notifying all affected property owners, filing amended plats with the county, and typically getting consent from the property owners. Did you receive any formal notice about boundary expansion? Nothing. The first I heard about any of this was when they taped that fine to my door. And there is actually no sidewalk, none. Want to drive by and see for yourself, she smiled slightly. I believe you, but yes, I will do a site visit. I am also going to pull the HOA's corporate filings and any plat amendments they may have filed with the county. If they are operating outside their legal authority, this should be relatively straightforward to shut down. That made me feel better, at least temporarily. Margaret said she would send a cease and desist letter to the HOA on my behalf, informing them that they had no jurisdiction over my property and demanding they stop all collection attempts. I left her office feeling like an adult again, instead of someone being bullied by a neighborhood busybody. That feeling lasted approximately 36 hours. I was working from home, video editing for a marketing company, when my doorbell rang. I glanced at the security camera feed on my phone and saw a woman standing on my porch. She was probably in her early 50s, with that particular haircut that had become a stereotype for a reason, short in the back and longer in front, dyed blonde with darker roots showing. She wore a puffy white jacket and had her arms crossed in a way that suggested she was ready for confrontation. I saved my project and went to the door. When I opened it, she did not wait for me to speak. "Are you Aaron Hutchinson?" she demanded. "Yes. Can I help you?" "I am Brenda Kellerman, president of the Pinewood Estates HOA." She said this like she expected me to genuflect. "We need to discuss your continued violation of community standards." "There is nothing to discuss. I am not part of your HOA. That is where you are wrong." She pulled a folder from under her arm and thrust it at me. "These are the updated plat maps showing our expanded boundaries. Your property is clearly included." I took the folder but did not open it. "Did you file these with the county?" "Of course we did." "And did you notify all affected property owners before filing?" She hesitated for just a fraction of a second. "That is not required." "Actually, it is." "I have spoken with an attorney." Her expression hardened. "So you are going to be difficult about this." "I am not being difficult. You are trying to enforce rules on a property that is not under your authority. That is not legal." "I do not care what some lawyer told you," Brenda said, her voice rising. "You live in this community and you will follow our rules. Your property is an eyesore and your refusal to maintain the sidewalk is unacceptable." "There is no sidewalk." I could feel my own voice getting louder. "Walk over there and look. Go ahead. There is no sidewalk on my property or anywhere on this street." "I have the sidewalk maintenance records right here," she said, patting her folder. "It clearly shows that your property includes sidewalk frontage. Records for a sidewalk that does not exist." "This is insane." "What is insane is your attitude," Brenda snapped. "This is exactly the kind of entitled behavior that ruins neighborhoods. People like you think you can just do whatever you want without regard for property values or community standards." "People like me," I repeated. "I am just trying to live in my house that I own, on property that is not part of your HOA." "You will be hearing from our attorney," she said, turning on her heel. "And those fines will continue to accumulate until you comply." She marched back to her car, a white Lexus SUV that looked like it had just been detailed, and drove off. I stood in my doorway holding the folder she had given me, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. Back inside, I opened the folder and examined the documents. They were photocopies of what appeared to be plat maps, but something about them looked off. The boundaries were drawn in a way that seemed arbitrary, a strange bulge that extended exactly to include my street but not the streets beyond. It did not match any logical expansion pattern. I scanned the documents and emailed them to Margaret with a note about Brenda's visit. She called me 20 minutes later. "These are forgeries," Margaret said without preamble. "What?" "Or at least, they are not official county documents. I just checked with the county recorder's office. Pinewood Estates, HOA, has not filed any boundary amendments. Their legal jurisdiction is exactly what it was when they incorporated 5 years ago, which does not include your property." "So she is just making this up." "It appears that way." I am not sure what her end game is, but this is starting to look less like a mistake and more like intentional harassment. Do you have any history with this woman or anyone else in that neighborhood? I thought about it. No. I have never even been to Pinewood Estates. I do not know anyone who lives there. Interesting. Well, I am going to send a much stronger letter now, and I am going to copy the county prosecutor's office. What they are doing could constitute fraud and extortion. Will that make it stop? It should. Most bullies back down when they realize there are actual consequences. I thanked her and hung up, but I had a sinking feeling this was far from over. I was right. The next morning, I found a bright orange sticker on my front door declaring my house a public nuisance and stating that I had 7 days to remedy the violations or face legal action. The sticker was signed by Brenda Kellerman with her title listed as Community Standards Enforcement Officer. I took a picture of it and sent it to Margaret, then carefully peeled it off. The adhesive left a sticky residue that I had to scrub with rubbing alcohol. 2 days later, I got a call from my boss, Jerry, who sounded confused. "Hey, Aaron, did you move or something?" "No, why?" "I just got a really weird email from someone claiming to be your HOA. They said that you are running a business out of your home in violation of community standards, and that our company might be held liable for enabling zoning violations." My jaw clenched. What did the email say exactly? "Hold on, I will forward it to you." A minute later, the email popped up in my inbox. It was from an official-looking HOA email address and was addressed to the general contact email for our company. The message claimed that I was operating a commercial business from my residence without proper permits and that the HOA was conducting an investigation. It suggested that my employer should be aware of potential legal liability. This was absolutely unhinged. I did video editing from my home office, which was completely legal and did not require any special permits. Lots of people worked from home. It was 2025, for crying out loud. "Jerry, this is harassment," I said. "I am not part of this HOA. They have been sending me fraudulent fines, and now they are apparently trying to interfere with my employment." "That is what I figured. The whole thing seemed sketchy. I just wanted to give you a heads up." "Thanks. I am dealing with it through a lawyer." "Good. Let me know if you need anything." After we hung up, I immediately called Margaret again. When I told her what happened, I could hear her typing rapidly. "That is it," she said. "This has crossed into actionable territory. I am filing for a restraining order, and I am also going to recommend that you file a police report. This is harassment, and potentially criminal harassment depending on how far they have taken it. Should I really get the police involved?" "Yes. This woman is sending fraudulent legal documents, interfering with your employment, and continuing to demand money for something you do not owe. That is extortion. The police need to have this on record." I agreed, and that afternoon I drove to the Columbus Police Department's 3rd Precinct to file a report. The officer who took my statement was a tired-looking man named Officer Davidson, who had clearly seen some things in his career. He listened to my story, examined the documents I had brought, and nodded slowly. "We have been getting more calls about HOA disputes lately," he said. "Most of them are civil matters that we cannot really get involved in, but this sounds different. The fraudulent documents and the contact with your employer could be criminal harassment. I will file the report and pass it along to our fraud unit. Do you think they will actually investigate? If the evidence is there, yes. Especially if your attorney has confirmed that these HOA documents are fake. That is fraud, and we take that seriously." I thanked him and left, feeling slightly better. At least now there was an official record of what was happening. That sense of progress evaporated the next day, when I discovered that someone had filed a false complaint with the City Code Enforcement Office. I got a notice in the mail stating that my property was being investigated for multiple violations, including failure to maintain sidewalks, operating an unpermitted business, and having a non-conforming mailbox. The inspection was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I called the code enforcement office and explained that the complaint was false, that there was no sidewalk on my property, and that everything else was completely legal. The woman I spoke with was sympathetic, but said the inspection had to proceed anyway since a formal complaint had been filed. "Who filed the complaint?" I asked. "I cannot release that information, but it came through official channels. Was it from a Pinewood Estates HOA?" There was a pause. "I really cannot say." That was answer enough. On Tuesday, a code enforcement officer named Tim Parker showed up at my door with a clipboard and a measuring tape. He was a friendly guy, probably in his 30s, with an apologetic expression that suggested he already knew this was a waste of time. "Sorry about this," he said as I let him in. "I have to follow up on all complaints, even the ones that seem questionable. I understand. I just want this on record that there are no violations." We walked around my property together. Tim took photos, made notes, and measured various things. When we got to the front of the house, he stood at the curb and looked both ways down the street. "So there is definitely no sidewalk here," he said. "Nope. And there never has been. Not in the 40-plus years this neighborhood has existed, as far as I know." He made a note. "Well, that is an easy one. I will put in my report that the sidewalk violation is unfounded because there is no sidewalk. As for the business operation, you work from home doing computer work, right? Video editing, yes. That is not a violation of any zoning law. You are not running a retail operation or having clients come to the property, correct? Correct. I just work on my computer." "Then that is fine. And the mailbox?" He looked at my red mailbox. "Is that original to the property?" "I think so. It was here when I bought the place." "Either way, there is no code violation for mailbox colors. That is an HOA thing, and even then only if you are actually in the HOA." He made another note. "I will have my report filed by Friday. Everything will be marked as unfounded or not applicable." I felt a wave of relief. "Thank you. I appreciate you being reasonable about this. Just doing my job. But between you and me, whoever filed this complaint wasted a lot of city resources. If it keeps happening, there could be consequences for filing false reports." After he left, I texted Margaret with an update. She responded that the restraining order hearing was scheduled for the following week, and that she had compiled a substantial file of evidence showing the HOA's harassment campaign. I thought maybe, finally, this nightmare would be coming to an end. I should have known better. That weekend, I came home from grocery shopping to find that someone had placed a large wooden sign in my front yard. It was professionally made, about 3 feet by 2 feet, and read, "This property is in violation of Community Standards Pinewood Estates HOA." I was so angry I could barely see straight. I pulled the sign out of the ground and carried it inside, then took photos of the holes it had left in my lawn. This was trespassing, vandalism, and continued harassment. I called the non-emergency police line and filed another report. A different officer came out this time, a woman named Officer Martinez. She took photos of the sign and the damage to my yard, and she reviewed the previous report I had filed. "This is escalating," she said. "Has your attorney filed for that restraining order yet? The hearing is this Thursday." Good. In the meantime, I would recommend installing some security cameras if you do not have them already. If they come back on your property, we will have video evidence. I already had a doorbell camera, but I took her advice and ordered 2 more cameras that day, one covering the front yard and one for the back. They arrived with next day shipping, and I spent Sunday afternoon installing them and setting up the monitoring app on my phone. The hearing for the restraining order was held at the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas on Thursday morning. Margaret had prepared a detailed brief with exhibits including all the fraudulent fine letters, the fake plat maps, the emails to my employer, documentation from the county recorder that no boundary expansion had been filed, the code enforcement report showing no violations, the police reports, photos of the sign in my yard, and a timeline of escalating harassment. Brenda Kellerman showed up with her own attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit named Richard Morrison. They sat on the opposite side of the courtroom, and Brenda spent the entire time before the hearing glaring at me. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Judge Patricia Reynolds, who had a reputation for not tolerating nonsense. She reviewed the documents Margaret had submitted, then listened as Margaret presented the case. "Your Honor, my client has been subjected to months of harassment by Miss Kellerman and the Pinewood Estates, HOA. They have sent fraudulent legal documents demanding payment for violations that do not exist. They have filed false complaints with city code enforcement. They have contacted my client's employer in an attempt to interfere with his employment. They have trespassed on his property. And all of this is based on a false claim that his property is subject to HOA authority when, in fact, county records clearly show that it is not." Judge Reynolds turned to Brenda's attorney. "Mr. Morrison, does your client dispute that Mr. Hutchinson's property is not legally within the HOA boundaries?" Morrison stood. "Your Honor, the HOA believes there was an informal understanding that the surrounding properties would eventually be incorporated into the association for the purposes of maintaining community standards. An informal understanding is not a legal basis for enforcement action," Judge Reynolds said dryly. "Do you have any documentation showing that Mr. Hutchinson's property is subject to HOA covenants?" "We have the plat maps showing. I have seen those maps, Mr. Morrison." "The county recorder has no record of any such filing. Those appear to be documents created by the HOA itself without legal authority." "Is that correct?" Morrison hesitated. "The HOA board believed. What the HOA board believed is irrelevant. Either the property is legally within the HOA or it is not. Based on the evidence presented, it is not. Your client has been harassing Mr. Hutchinson based on a false claim of authority." She looked down at the documents again. "And this is not just simple harassment. Your client has filed false official complaints, contacted his employer, and trespassed on his property. Miss Kellerman, do you understand that these actions could be criminal?" Brenda stood up, despite her lawyer trying to stop her. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this man has shown complete disregard for community standards. His property is an eyesore, and his refusal to comply is dragging down property values for the entire area. Miss Kellerman, he is not part of your HOA. You have no authority over his property." "Someone has to maintain standards," Brenda insisted, her voice rising. "If we let people just do whatever they want, the whole neighborhood falls apart. I have a responsibility to the homeowners who elected me." "Your responsibility is to the homeowners who are actually in your HOA," Judge Reynolds said sharply. "You have no responsibility and no authority over people outside your association. The fact that you think you do is troubling." She made some notes, then looked up. "I am granting the restraining order. Miss Kellerman, you are to have no contact with Mr. Hutchinson. You are not to send him any correspondence. You are not to go near his property. You are not to contact his employer or file any complaints about him with any government agency. If you violate this order, you will be held in contempt of court. Do you understand?" Brenda's face had gone red. "This is ridiculous. He is violating— Do you understand, Miss Kellerman? Judge Reynolds interrupted. Yes, Brenda said through clenched teeth. Additionally, I am ordering you to pay Mr. Hutchinson's attorney fees related to this action. Mr. Morrison, you will work with Miss Chen to determine a reasonable amount. As we left the courtroom, I felt like I could finally breathe. Margaret looked satisfied. That went well, she said. Judge Reynolds clearly saw through their nonsense. So it is over, it should be. The restraining order is enforceable, and if she violates it, there will be serious consequences. My recommendation is to keep your cameras running and document anything suspicious, but she would have to be incredibly stupid to do anything else at this point. We said goodbye in the parking lot, and I drove home feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The nightmare was finally over. Or so I thought. For about 2 weeks, everything was quiet. No letters, no signs in my yard, no weird phone calls. I started to relax and get back to my normal life. The security cameras mostly just recorded squirrels and the occasional delivery driver. Then I got a text message from my neighbor across the street, an elderly man named Tom who I occasionally helped with yard work. Someone was taking pictures of your house today. Thought you should know. I thanked him and checked the camera footage. Sure enough, around 2 in the afternoon, a car had parked across the street and someone had taken multiple photos of my house from various angles. The car was a silver Honda, not Brenda's white Lexus. I could not see the driver clearly enough to identify them. I saved the footage and sent it to Margaret with a note. She responded that it might be nothing, but to keep documenting everything. The next day, I received a certified letter from a law firm I had never heard of. Inside was a notice that the Pinewood Estates HOA was suing me for $8,000 in unpaid fines and fees, plus damages for willful violation of community standards and malicious interference with HOA governance. I could not believe it. After everything, after the restraining order, they were actually suing me. I called Margaret immediately. She sounded more angry than I had ever heard her. This is absolutely outrageous, she said. They are clearly violating the spirit of the restraining order, and this lawsuit is completely frivolous. I am going to file a motion to dismiss, and I am also going to ask the judge to hold Brenda in contempt. Can they actually do this? They can file anything they want, but it will get thrown out. The problem is that it costs you time and money to defend against it, which is exactly what they want. This is a slap suit, strategic lawsuit against public participation. They are trying to punish you for standing up to them. Over the next few weeks, Margaret filed the motion to dismiss, and also filed a motion asking the court to hold Brenda in contempt for violating the restraining order by continuing to take action against me through the lawsuit. We had another hearing, this time in front of Judge Reynolds again. She was not happy. Mr. Morrison, I thought I made myself very clear at our last hearing, Judge Reynolds said. Your client was ordered to cease all contact and all action against Mr. Hutchinson. Yet here we are with a lawsuit for HOA violations that we have already established do not exist because Mr. Hutchinson is not part of the HOA. Morrison looked significantly less confident than he had at the previous hearing. Your Honor, the lawsuit was filed by the HOA board collectively, not by Miss Kellerman personally. Miss Kellerman is the president of the HOA board. Do not insult my intelligence by pretending she was not involved in this decision. Judge Reynolds flipped through the file. This lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. It is frivolous on its face. Additionally, I am finding Miss Kellerman in contempt of court for violating the restraining order. Brenda made a strangled sound from her seat. Miss Kellerman, you are fined $2,000, payable to the court. You are also ordered to pay Mr. Hutchinson's attorney fees related to defending against this lawsuit. If you engage in any further harassment of Mr. Hutchinson, I will not hesitate to impose jail time. Am I making myself clear?" "Yes, Your Honor," Brenda said, her voice barely audible. "Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the prosecutor's office for investigation of potential criminal charges including harassment, fraud, and filing false documents. You may face criminal prosecution." That got everyone's attention. Morrison tried to object, but Judge Reynolds shut him down. "Your client has engaged in a months-long campaign of harassment based on fraudulent claims of authority. She has cost Mr. Hutchinson significant time, money, and stress. She has wasted court resources and city resources. There need to be consequences." After the hearing, Margaret and I stood in the hallway while Brenda and her attorney had what looked like a very heated conversation near the elevators. "That was even better than I hoped," Margaret said. "Judge Reynolds just handed this to the prosecutor. They will open an actual criminal investigation. Will anything come of it? Hard to say. It depends on how much evidence they find and whether the prosecutor thinks it is worth pursuing. But at minimum, Brenda is going to be dealing with legal problems of her own now. She will not have time to harass you." I felt vindicated but also exhausted. This whole situation had consumed months of my life over something completely absurd. About 2 weeks later, I got a call from a detective with the Columbus Police Department named Detective Sarah Chen. She wanted to interview me about the harassment complaint and the judge's referral. We met at a coffee shop near my house. Detective Chen was in her late 30s, professional and thorough. She had already reviewed the court documents and the police reports, and she had some additional questions about the timeline and specific incidents. "We have opened a formal investigation," she explained. "We are looking at charges of criminal harassment, fraud for the fake documents, and potentially extortion for demanding money based on false claims. We are also investigating whether other homeowners have been targeted." Other homeowners. We pulled the HOA's complaint history with the city. Over the past year, they have filed 47 different code enforcement complaints against properties outside their legal jurisdiction. Most of those were dismissed, but it shows a pattern. So I am not the only one, not even close. You are the first one who fought back hard enough for it to reach this level, though. Most people probably just paid the fines to make it stop, or they moved. That made me angry all over again. How many people had Brenda and her HOA bullied into paying money they did not owe? What happens now? I asked. We continue investigating. We will interview other victims, review the HOA's financial records if we can get a warrant, and build a case. Then it goes to the prosecutor to decide whether to file charges. These things take time, but I want you to know we are taking it seriously. I thanked her and left the coffee shop feeling like maybe, finally, justice would be served. Over the next few months, I tried to get back to normal life. The harassment had stopped completely. No letters, no signs, no weird incidents. My security cameras recorded nothing but the usual suburban activity. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine, courtesy of Tom across the street, that Brenda had stepped down as HOA president. Apparently, there had been an emergency board meeting after the contempt ruling, and several board members had demanded her resignation. She had refused at first, but when word got out about the criminal investigation, the other members threatened to vote her out. She resigned. I also learned that the HOA was facing a class action lawsuit from several homeowners who had paid fines for properties that were not actually within HOA boundaries. Margaret had put me in touch with the attorney handling that case, and I had given a statement about my experience. The lawsuit was seeking reimbursement of all fines paid, plus damages for harassment. In August, about 6 months after the first fine letter had appeared on my door, Detective Chen called me with an update. "We have finished the investigation, and the prosecutor has decided to file charges," she said. "Brenda Kellerman is being charged with multiple counts of criminal harassment, 3 counts of fraud for the fake documents, and attempted extortion. There are also charges against 2 other board members who were involved in the scheme." "Wow," was all I could say. "The arraignment is next week. I wanted to give you advance notice in case the media picks it up. HOA crime stories tend to get attention." She was right about that. The local news ran a story about it, with the headline "HOA President Charged with Harassment and Fraud." The story detailed how Brenda and other board members had systematically targeted homeowners outside their jurisdiction with fake fines and harassment. Several victims were interviewed, including me. My phone blew up with messages from friends and family who had seen the story. My video editor colleague sent me a message that just said, "Sidewalk guy," with about 15 crying, laughing emojis. Apparently, my story had made it onto social media and was going viral. Someone had even made a meme with a picture of an empty street and the caption, "HOA fined me for not clearing this sidewalk." The attention was weird but also validating. People understood how absurd the whole situation had been. The criminal case moved slowly, as these things do. Brenda pleaded not guilty and tried to fight the charges, claiming that she had genuinely believed the properties were within HOA jurisdiction and that any mistakes were honest errors. The prosecutor was not buying it. They had evidence showing that Brenda and the other board members had discussed in email how to expand our reach and bring in more fee revenue. They had specifically targeted properties that looked like they might be easy to intimidate. They had created the fake plat maps knowing they were not official. It was a deliberate scheme. In November, facing overwhelming evidence, Brenda changed her plea to guilty on several counts as part of a plea agreement. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for early December. Margaret called me the day before the hearing. "You do not have to go, but you have the option to give a victim impact statement if you want to." I thought about it. Part of me wanted to just let it be over, but another part felt like Brenda needed to hear directly how her actions had affected people. "I will be there," I said. The courthouse was more crowded than I expected. Several other victims were there to give statements as well. Brenda sat at the defendant's table looking smaller than I remembered, her expensive suit replaced with a simple dress. She looked tired and defeated. One by one, victims gave their statements. An elderly couple who had paid over $3,000 in fines because they were terrified of legal action. A single mother who had nearly lost her job because the HOA had contacted her employer. A veteran who had suffered anxiety attacks from the harassment. When it was my turn, I stood at the podium and looked at Brenda. "For months, you made my life hell over a sidewalk that does not exist," I said. "You sent me fake legal documents. You filed false complaints. You tried to interfere with my job. You trespassed on my property. And when I proved you were wrong, you doubled down instead of admitting your mistake. You did all of this because you enjoyed the power. You liked being able to tell people what to do and punish them if they did not comply. You are a bully, and I am glad you are finally facing consequences." Brenda did not look at me. She kept her eyes down on the table in front of her. After all the statements were heard, Judge Reynolds delivered the sentence. Brenda was sentenced to 90 days in jail, 3 years of probation, 300 hours of community service, and ordered to pay restitution to all the victims. The total restitution amount was over $40,000. The other two board members who had been charged received lesser sentences because they had cooperated with the investigation, but they also faced jail time, probation, and fines. As I left the courthouse that day, I felt a sense of closure. It had been a long, ridiculous, infuriating journey, but justice had been served. The class action lawsuit against the Pinewood Estates HOA was settled a few months later. The HOA's insurance company agreed to pay out $200,000 to be divided among the victims, plus attorney fees. I received about $8,000, which more than covered my own attorney fees and compensated me for the time and stress. The HOA itself was essentially dissolved. So many homeowners within Pinewood Estates had demanded to be let out of the HOA after the scandal that it could no longer function. They held a vote and disbanded the association entirely. The deed restrictions were removed, and everyone was free to paint their mailboxes whatever color they wanted. Tom from across the street thought the whole thing was hilarious. "You single-handedly destroyed an HOA," he said when I helped him rake leaves that fall. "That is legendary." "I just wanted them to leave me alone," I said. "Well, you did that and then some." Life eventually returned to normal. I kept the security cameras up, more out of habit than necessity. The neighborhood was quiet. No one sent me any more fine letters or put signs in my yard. I did get one interesting piece of mail about a year after everything started. It was a handwritten letter with no return address. Inside was a single piece of paper with a short note. "Mr. Hutchinson, I was on the Pinewood Estates HOA board when all of this happened. I want you to know that I tried to stop Brenda multiple times. She was obsessed with expanding the HOA and bringing in more fee money. She said it would increase our budget for neighborhood improvements, but really I think she just liked the control. When I objected, she threatened to remove me from the board. I should have fought harder. I should have gone to the authorities myself. I am sorry for my cowardice and for what you went through. You did the right thing by standing up to her. Thank you for that." It was unsigned. I kept that letter in my desk drawer. It was a reminder that not everyone in that HOA had been complicit, and that speaking up against bullies was always the right choice, even when it was difficult. My story made the rounds on social media for a while, popping up periodically on Reddit forums and Twitter threads about HOA horror stories. People loved the absurdity of being fined for not clearing a non-existent sidewalk. Some called me a hero. Others just thought it was funny. I tried not to pay too much attention to it. Margaret Chen sent me a nice bottle of whiskey when everything was finally settled. The card said, "To standing your ground. You were a model client and you made my job easy by documenting everything. Congratulations on your victory." I appreciated that. She had been excellent throughout the entire ordeal. Detective Chen also followed up with me after the sentencing. She said the case had led to some policy changes in how the city handled HOA complaints. Code enforcement now verified that the complaining party actually had jurisdiction before investigating, and there were new penalties for filing false reports. It was not much, but it might prevent someone else from going through what I had experienced. On the 1-year anniversary of finding that first fine letter on my door, I threw a small party. I invited Tom and a few other neighbors, plus Margaret, Detective Chen, and Tim, the code enforcement officer who had been so reasonable during his inspection. We stood in my front yard, right where the non-existent sidewalk was supposed to be, and I gave a mock toast. To standing your ground, to knowing your rights, and to the fact that sometimes the system actually works when you fight back. And to sidewalks everywhere, but especially to the ones that do not exist. Everyone laughed and raised their glasses. It was a good moment. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home and I was cleaning up, I stood in my driveway and looked at my house. It was just a normal ranch house in a normal neighborhood in Columbus, Ohio. Nothing special. But it was mine, completely and legally mine, with no HOA telling me what I could or could not do with it. That was worth fighting for. I never heard from Brenda Kellerman again. I occasionally wondered if she learned anything from the experience, or if she still believed she had been right and the world had wronged her. I hoped it was the former, but I suspected it was the latter. Some people are so invested in being right that they can never admit when they are wrong. The Pinewood Estates neighborhood went through some changes after the HOA dissolved. Some of the houses got new paint colors, bolder choices than the beige and gray that had dominated before. One person painted their front door bright purple. Another put up a decorative fence that probably would have violated the old rules. The neighborhood did not fall into chaos like Brenda had always predicted. It just became more normal, more individual, more like the place where I lived. I continued with my work as a video editor, taking on more clients and growing my business. The whole HOA nightmare had taught me something about standing up for myself and not backing down when I knew I was right. That confidence carried over into other areas of my life. I negotiated better rates with clients. I pushed back when people tried to take advantage of me. I became more assertive in general. The red mailbox stayed red. I considered repainting it just to change things up, but I decided against it. It had become a symbol in my mind of resisting arbitrary authority. Plus, I kind of liked the color. One random day in spring, about 18 months after everything started, I was out front planting some flowers when a car slowed down in front of my house. I tensed for a moment, old instincts kicking in, but it was just a younger couple looking at houses in the neighborhood. The woman rolled down her window. "Excuse me, is this house for sale?" "No, sorry," I said. "Oh, okay. Do you know if there is an HOA in this neighborhood?" I smiled. "Nope. No HOA. That is actually one of the best things about living here." "Really? That is great. We have been looking specifically for non-HOA properties." "Smart choice," I said. They thanked me and drove off. I went back to planting my flowers, thinking about how one crazy experience had turned me into an evangelist for HOA-free living. The story did have ripple effects beyond just my own situation. The class action lawsuit and the criminal case created precedent that other attorneys started citing in HOA disputes. Margaret told me she had gotten several new clients who referenced my case when they came to her with their own HOA problems. The local news did a follow-up story about HOA overreach and how homeowners could protect themselves. I even got invited to speak at a local community meeting about property rights. I was not much of a public speaker, but I told my story and emphasized the importance of knowing your property documents, keeping records of everything, and not being afraid to get a lawyer involved when you were being mistreated. People seemed to appreciate the practical advice. The Franklin County Recorder's Office also made changes. They created a public database where anyone could easily verify whether a property was within HOA boundaries. It was searchable by address and showed all recorded covenants and restrictions. This kind of transparency would have saved me a lot of trouble at the beginning of my situation. As time went on, the whole thing became a funny story I would tell at parties, or when people complained about their own HOA issues. Let me tell you about the time an HOA tried to fine me for not clearing a sidewalk that does not exist. It was always a crowd pleaser, but underneath the humor, there was a serious point. HOAs wield enormous power over people's homes and lives, often with very little oversight or accountability. When that power is abused, as it was in my case, It can cause real harm. People need to know their rights and be willing to fight back against overreach. I also learned that the legal system, for all its flaws, can work. It took time and it cost money, but ultimately, justice was served. The bad actors faced consequences. The victims were compensated. Changes were made to prevent future abuse. That was not nothing. My property values did not suffer from my lack of HOA membership, contrary to Brenda's dire predictions. In fact, when houses in my neighborhood went on sale, they often sold faster and for more money than comparable properties in Pinewood Estates, precisely because they were not burdened with HOA restrictions. Buyers valued freedom. I stayed in touch with some of the other victims from the case. We formed an informal support network, sharing information about HOA reform efforts and occasionally meeting for coffee. It was nice to connect with people who understood what it was like to be targeted by a vindictive HOA board. One woman from the group, Patricia, had a story even worse than mine. Brenda's HOA had fined her repeatedly for having a vegetable garden in her backyard, claiming it violated aesthetic standards, even though Patricia's property was not in the HOA and her backyard was not visible from any street. When Patricia refused to pay, the HOA had filed a lien against her property, which caused problems when she tried to refinance her mortgage. It took months and significant legal fees to get the fraudulent lien removed. Patricia received one of the larger settlements from the class action lawsuit. Another victim, an older man named Robert, had been fined for parking his car on the street in front of his own house. The HOA claimed that street parking was not allowed, even though it was a public street maintained by the city. Robert had paid several fines before finally realizing he was being scammed. He was the one who first reported the HOA to the police, actually, which is what started the criminal investigation. Hearing these stories made me realize how lucky I was that I had pushed back immediately instead of paying the first fine. If I had paid, they would have kept coming back for more. Bullies always do. The weather turned cold again as winter approached, marking 2 full years since this whole saga began. I was sitting in my living room one evening, working on a video project, when I got a notification from my front door camera. Someone was at the door. I pulled up the feed and saw a woman I did not recognize standing on my porch. She looked nervous, glancing around like she was worried about being seen. I went to the door and opened it. "Can I help you?" I asked. "Are you Erin Hutchinson?" she asked. "Yes, I am Jennifer Morrison. I live in Pinewood Grove, the development on the east side of town." She paused. "Our HOA is doing the same thing yours did. They are trying to claim properties outside their boundaries and demanding fines. I saw your story in the news and I was hoping you might be able to give me some advice." I invited her in and made coffee. She told me her story, which was depressingly familiar. Fake fines, aggressive tactics, refusal to acknowledge that the property was not in their jurisdiction. She had already consulted with an attorney, but she wanted to know what to expect from my experience. I told her everything. Document everything, keep all correspondence, file police reports, do not back down, and get a good lawyer. I gave her Margaret Chen's contact information. I also warned her that it would be stressful and time-consuming, but that it was worth it to fight back. "They are counting on you being too intimidated or too tired to resist," I said. "That is how they get away with it. But if you stand firm and use the legal system, you can win." She left looking more determined than when she arrived. I hoped things would work out for her. A few months later, she emailed me to say that her case had been resolved. The HOA had backed down immediately when her attorney sent a cease and desist letter citing my case as precedent. Apparently, The publicity from the criminal prosecution had scared HOAs throughout the region into being more careful about their enforcement actions. No one wanted to be the next Brenda Kellerman. That felt good. My fight had not just helped me, it had made things better for others too. I ran into Tim, the code enforcement officer, at a hardware store one Saturday. We chatted for a few minutes, and he told me that the false complaint problem had dropped significantly since the new verification procedures were put in place. We still get HOA complaints, but now we check jurisdiction first, he said. If they are not authorized to complain about a property, we tell them that and close the case. It saves us a lot of time and saves homeowners a lot of hassle. That is great, I said. I am glad something good came out of all that mess. You did a good thing, standing up to them. A lot of people would have just paid to make it go away. I thought about that as I drove home. He was probably right. It would have been easier in the short term to just pay the first fine and hope they left me alone. But easier is not always better. Sometimes you have to do the hard thing, the right thing, even when it costs you time and money and peace of mind. As I turned onto my street, I noticed that Tom had put up Christmas lights already, way too early in the season. They were multicolored and chaotic, the kind of display that would have given Brenda Kellerman an aneurysm. I smiled. This was what freedom looked like. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment, looking at my house. Just a normal house on a normal street in Columbus, Ohio. No sidewalk in front of it. No HOA telling me what to do with it. Just mine. That was enough. The years that followed were peaceful. I lived my life, worked my job, maintained my property to reasonable standards because I wanted to, not because someone was forcing me to. I traveled a bit, picking up freelance video editing projects that let me work remotely. I dated, though nothing serious stuck. I adopted a dog, a rescue mutt named Charlie who loved to lie in the front yard and watch the world go by. Charlie would have definitely violated some kind of HOA rule somewhere. He was the wrong kind of dog, or the wrong size, or he barked at the wrong times. But in my HOA-free paradise, he was perfect. The story faded from public attention, as all stories eventually do. New HOA scandals took the spotlight. My 15 minutes of internet fame passed. Life returned to normal, which was exactly what I had wanted all along. But I never forgot the lesson. Power unchecked leads to abuse. Authority claimed without legal basis is tyranny on a small scale. And ordinary people have more power than they think when they are willing to stand up and fight for what is right. I keep all the documents from the case in a file box in my closet. The fake fine letters, the restraining order, the court rulings, newspaper clippings about the criminal trial, the settlement check from the class action lawsuit. Sometimes I pull them out and look through them, reminding myself that it really happened, that it was not some bizarre fever dream. My favorite document is the letter from Judge Reynolds dismissing the HOA's lawsuit. Her language is so precise and so cutting. Frivolous on its face, she wrote. A clear abuse of process. Those words validated everything I had been saying from the beginning. The red mailbox is showing its age now. The paint has faded and chipped in places. I should probably repaint it or replace it entirely. But I cannot bring myself to do it. That mailbox is a survivor, just like me. It withstood Brenda Kellerman's wrath and came out the other side. It deserves to stay exactly as it is. On the 3rd anniversary of finding that first fine letter, I did not throw a party. I just stood in my front yard in the late afternoon sun, Charlie sitting beside me, and thought about how far things had come. From harassment and stress to peace and victory. From feeling powerless to learning that the system could work if you pushed hard enough. A car drove by and the driver waved. I waved back. Just a normal day in a normal neighborhood, and that was perfect. Years from now, when I am old and telling stories to grandchildren I do not have yet, I will tell them about the time an HOA tried to fine me for not clearing a sidewalk that did not exist. They will probably laugh and think I am exaggerating. But I will show them the documents, the proof that it really happened, and I will tell them the important part. That when someone tries to bully you, when someone claims authority they do not have, when someone tries to make you pay for something you do not owe, you fight back. You stand your ground. You do not give in, because giving in to bullies never works. It just encourages them to keep bullying. I learned that lesson the hard way, but I learned it thoroughly. And I would not change a thing about how I handled it, even though it was difficult and expensive and time-consuming. Some things are worth fighting for, and the principle that you own your property and no one can impose arbitrary rules on you without legal authority is definitely one of those things. The non-existent sidewalk became a metaphor in my mind. You cannot maintain something that is not there. You cannot comply with rules that do not apply to you. You cannot pay fines based on authority that does not exist. And when someone tries to make you do those impossible things, the only reasonable response is to say no and make them prove they have the right to demand anything from you at all. Brenda Kellerman could not prove it because the right did not exist. The HOA had no authority over my property. The sidewalk was not there. The entire foundation of their harassment campaign was built on nothing, and when you build on nothing, everything collapses eventually. It just took the legal system a while to catch up and knock it down, but it did catch up. Justice was served. The victims were made whole, at least financially. The perpetrators faced consequences. The system worked, not perfectly, not quickly, not without significant effort and cost. But it worked, and that is what matters. I still live in my house in Columbus. Still no HOA, still no sidewalk, still the red mailbox that has become a personal symbol of resistance against arbitrary authority. Charlie got older, slower, grayer around the muzzle. We still sit in the front yard together on nice days, watching the neighborhood go by. Sometimes people stop to pet him and chat. I never mention the HOA saga unless they ask, but sometimes they do because they have heard the story somewhere. "You are the sidewalk guy," they will say with a smile. "That is me," I reply, and we talk about HOAs and property rights and the importance of standing up for yourself. The conversation always ends the same way, with them thanking me for fighting back because it made things better for everyone. That feels good every single time. Life goes on. Projects come and go. Seasons change. The neighborhood evolves. But some things remain constant: my house, my property, my freedom from HOA tyranny, and that ridiculous, absurd, infuriating story about being fined for not clearing a sidewalk that did not exist. It happened. I fought back. I won. End of story. Actually, not quite the end. There is one more detail worth mentioning. About 4 years after everything started, I got a message through LinkedIn from someone named Michael Kellerman. The name made my stomach drop. It was Brenda's son. The message was short. "Mr. Hutchinson, I know you have no reason to listen to anything from my family, but I wanted to reach out. My mother is out of jail and on probation. She has been going to therapy. I just wanted you to know that she understands now that what she did was wrong. She asked me to tell you that she is sorry. She does not expect you to forgive her or respond. She just wanted you to know. I am sorry too for what it is worth. What she put you through was terrible. Anyway, that is all. I hope you are doing well." I stared at that message for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Part of me wanted to write back something angry. But mostly I just felt tired of the whole thing. I wrote back, "Thank you for reaching out. I appreciate the apology. I hope your mother is getting the help she needs. I have moved on with my life and I wish you and your family well. It was not quite forgiveness, but it was not continued anger either. It was just closure. He wrote back a simple thank you, and that was that. I do not know what Brenda is doing now. I do not follow her or think about her. She is just a person who was part of a difficult chapter of my life that is now over. And that is truly the end of the story. My house sits on Elmwood Drive in Columbus, Ohio. There is no sidewalk in front of it. There never was. There never will be, unless the city decides to build one someday, which seems unlikely given that the whole street has been this way for 50 years. But if they did build one, I would clear it after it snows, because that would be my responsibility, legally and practically. Until then, I have nothing to clear, no sidewalk to maintain, no HOA to answer to, no arbitrary rules to follow, just freedom, peace, and a red mailbox that has seen some things.